everybody. I'm Marilyn, CEO and founder of Cosmic Centaurs and the host of our weekly live video series, Center Stage. We are nearing the end of our second season. Can you believe that? Our season all about the magic of teams and all the things that make teams cohesive, high-performing, and happy. Today's episode falls into our fourth chapter about scaling teams. We started the chapter last week with Tarek Saiduddin, who shared with us the growing pains of scaling teams. And today we're exploring the topic through a different lens, looking at what it actually takes to hire people globally. Every Thursday, I'm joined by experts and thought leaders on LinkedIn Live at 3:30 p.m. UAE time. And as always, before we begin, do show us some love. Give this video a like. I know that there was a lot of enthusiasm for today's episode, so Peter and I will try to make it worth your while. So many of you are really enthusiastic about the content today. Of course, we encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments, ask questions, and we will try to make our best to go through them together. And I'll make sure to ask Peter all of your juicy questions. And let me introduce our guest. Our guest for today is Pieter Manden. He is WorkMotion's head of trust and employer compliance. He's a Dutch certified tax lawyer specializing in compliance around modern mobility and has 13 years of professional experience with PwC in the Netherlands and Germany. Prior to joining WorkMotion in January 2022, he was responsible for PwC Germany's remote work proposition. He speaks Dutch, English, German, but don't worry, today's show is just in English, and holds an MBA from the SCP Business School in Paris. Peter, thanks so much for joining us today.
Very happy to be here.
Look, a lot of people are very excited about what you have to teach us, so I'm going to not make them wait too long, but just a quick introduction on today's topic. Of course, with remote and hybrid work settling in for the long run, we've also seen the rise of what some people call telemigration, which is companies hiring great talent anywhere around the world by taking advantage of these new work models. But scaling on a global level has quite a few challenges. I myself have seen a company scale from 2 cities to 10, and I know how complicated that can be, not only because of the barriers to synchronous work and communication and time zone and cultural differences, but also because different places, different countries have different laws and regulations concerning work. And, you know, this idea of remote work has now allowed us to hire people everywhere. It does raise the question about local entities, you know, and how do you manage the recruitment and actually be compliant with the law? And that's today, Peter was going to help us. His company, WorkMotion, helps organizations overcome international compliance hurdles to hire people based anywhere in the world. He's going to tell us all that we should know when we're hiring globally. So let's get started. Peter, maybe you can just start with quickly introducing WorkMotion and the work that you do with the organization.
Yes, of course. So WorkMotion is a German-based company. It was founded a little over 2 years ago. So we're very young, but rapidly growing. Started talking to them in early 2020, 5 people. Now we're at well over 250. And although we are German-based, we are fully flexible, fully remote. You can work anywhere, anytime with us. No barriers there. And that's actually what we try to enable for our clients too. Global employment. We've got a couple of products for that. Typical employer of record. So where we hire people for our clients all around the globe where they do not have to have any local presence. But we've also diversified into other, let's say, work of the future propositions, such as temporary work from abroad. So that's more static global employment. Yeah, that's what we do. Basically helping clients to make use of the new reality and being able to hire from the global talent pool.
Brilliant. And as I said earlier, I mean, of course, this the fact that everybody realized that we don't constantly have to be together to do work has opened up the possibility of hiring globally. And that's been seen as one of the main benefits of remote work. Through your lens, what are the actual benefits of hiring people all around the world?
Well, doing it myself, I think, first of all, it's really cool because of the soft aspects that you said, different cultures, also the necessity to work async and things like that. It's a new way of working. with a lot more flexibility. And if you can cope with that, I think that is very cool. But more technically, I think there's two very interesting things that we see in the world. Many countries or employers suffering from a big labor shortage. But if you look at a global scale, there's also significant unemployment still. That doesn't match up. And I think, although we're not going to solve those two problems within a week or a month from now, I think hiring globally, so global employment, is, of course, on the long term, great opportunity for at least helping in solving those two problems, like hiring people that are unemployed for several reasons in another part of the world, and it helps you to close your labor shortage gap.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, just this morning, I was talking with the CEO of a global organization, and he was sharing how it's been really difficult to both hire and retain talent these days, which of course could sound like a surprise because, as you said, one would think that in the aftermath of the pandemic, so many people losing their jobs, the great resignation, all of these things that we've seen, that there would be an abundance of talent available and looking for work. And in fact, companies are finding it really hard to fill out positions across the hierarchy. Do you get that sense as well? And what are your thoughts around why that's happening?
Yeah, well, 100% get that. I see it. So I've been in Western Europe as my entire career, and labor shortage has always been there. And it's only growing due to the aging population. The number of the working population is basically decreasing. And if you want growth of your economy, you need either more automation, but we've seen that doesn't really solve the problem. So of course we do automate things, but still we see, especially for highly skilled individuals, there's just a growing demand. And especially in our business, like we're now in the business of early adopters, right? We are sourcing for programmers, tech specialists.
Right.
You cannot find them anymore in Western Europe, more or less. So you'd have to look abroad. Before the pandemic, that wasn't really generally accepted or considered a good possibility. And well, that's maybe the only good thing we got from the pandemic. It changed that whole view. We know that remote work somehow works. It's not easy. It's not for everybody, but for tech people, maybe it is.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great point. And so, all right. So if we understand the benefits and our ability to close that gap in recruiting the right talent around the world, talk to us a little bit about the complexities that people should think about before simply saying, amazing, I'm just going to hire people in another country.
Yeah, exactly. So again, do not forget about the soft aspects. It is very important. But yeah, the legal and tax implications of hiring globally, they're pretty significant too. I think in general, companies think that they need some kind of local presence. Back in the day, everybody would set up entities all around the world. That's quite costly and quite a difficult thing to do, especially if you're only hiring one person and you're not entirely sure whether that's going to be a good fit. So that's of course difficult, but there are other factors related to hiring globally that are complex. Local labor law applies, but you don't know local labor law. You'd have to run a payroll locally, which is the most, let's say, regionally relevant thing. There is no such thing as global payroll. And all of that, let's say, local knowledge and experience, I think that's the major barrier for employers to say, oh yeah, of course I'm going to hire some people in, I don't know, India.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, I've had to do this in a lot of different countries. Again, prior to COVID, as we expand, you just kind of have to go and figure out what the local presence looks like. And as you said, it can be a very costly exercise, both in terms of a learning curve, because you naturally think that what applies back home is probably how it is everywhere in the world. And then you realize benefits, days off, all of these things that you don't think about, they differ. The way that you pay people, like, what is usual, like in Canada or in the US, every other week payment is usual, whereas in other parts of the world, it's monthly. Like, there's a lot of small intricacies that you kind of don't realize you're going to have to deal with, in addition to the complexity of establishing a legal entity in another country anyways. Is it worth the effort for companies to go through that learning curve? And what are your thoughts on how companies like yours can support them?
Yeah, so great question. So I think it's not worth it for everyone. Just like remote work is not for everyone, by the way. No, I think setting up an entity and bearing the costs, etc., is only worth it under two conditions, namely that you're in there for the long run. You do not establish an entity in whatever country if you're planning to only maybe test with one employee or trying to figure out whether you're going to really be able to win some local business. So you need to be in there for the long term. And of course, it also needs to be for a significant presence. And that's exactly what I think has changed now. If you're hiring from the global talent pool, what we saw before the pandemic is that especially tech firms were setting up tech centers in some countries, because they'd say, okay, there's at least a couple of tech people there who are not employed yet. So we'd like to establish a little bit of a basis there, create a little bit of an office maybe, and there we hire 10, 15, 20 programmers. Wasn't always very successful. The opportunity that you see now is that you can say, well, we do one there, we do one there, we do another one over there. But that's exactly the problem with establishing local entities. Yeah. If you are just super scattered in your hiring, which is great from an employment perspective, the entity establishment is generally not worth it. You'd have to find out whether this individual, as I said, is a good match, whether you're happy. And only for one individual setting up an entity, that's probably not worthwhile. So that's exactly actually the gap that we're trying to close with WorkMotion, saying, well, you can hire, you can test, build up your business. At some point, we're totally with you. You might want to have your own establishment there, but until then, we're there for you.
Well, so tell us a little bit about how you guys function. What does it mean to be an employer of record? How does that relationship work? And then what is the difference with professional employer organizations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are different, of course, setups that you can choose if you're hiring globally. And I guess the most simple one is employer of record, because it means you have the least local presence, namely only the individual. Other than that, zero. What we then do is we employ the individual for you. Officially, our name is on the work contract, and this employee will be leased out generally to the client on a full-time basis. So, of course, from a cost perspective, the client, the employer, is basically bearing all the cost. But other than that, there's no burden at all. We do the contract. We do determine the benefits, of course, in discussion with you. We do the payroll, the payments, etc. And that's the first and the most simple setup. And then PEO is something you generally see as a second step. It's called like a direct employment solution, where you as a client are actually registered locally, only as an employer. It doesn't require you to have an entity. The good news is, as a result, the employee actually has the name of the company, of your company, in the work contract, which is nice. It does come with a responsibility. You are the employer, so you are officially responsible for the taxation, etc. That is, however, outsourced to us. So we will then do the payroll. We'll still do the payments, etc. But there's in the US, this would be known as some kind of co-employment. It doesn't exist everywhere, but there the official employment lies with the client. However, you not need local presence, and especially you don't need local knowledge other than just one simple registration. And I guess the next step would be you actually establish an entity.
Okay, so I have a lot of questions about like how this works on a day-to-day basis. So let's say Cosmic Centaurs hires you guys to be the employer of record, which means, as you were saying earlier, that WorkMotion's name, or whatever the name of your local entity, is on the contract with an employee that is a Cosmic Centaurs employee. How do you deal with HR matters? Are you legally responsible for that? So suppose that I mismanage that relationship, or I decide to let somebody go and it doesn't comply. Like, how does that situation happen, and how do you guys manage that conversation with the company that's hiring you?
Yeah, so you should consider us basically your local HR function. Of course, I can be clear, right? If there's an unfair dismissal and that leads to like high severance payments or so, assuming that we did not like give you false instructions, but basically the client, I don't know, was very, just got very mad and did a right away, like I fire you right here, right now. Financially, we're not bearing that risk. But we are your local HR function. That means we will tell you everything that you need to know around it. So we'll guide you in dismissals, for instance. And yes, formally, we are responsible for everything. So although we might like charge onwards any financial consequences to you, we are the official employer and we'll take that responsibility. I think in practice, yeah, there's just a lot of discussion. We have the local knowledge, we have the local experience. We even have local partners, lawyers, etc., whom we can consult. We are the network, and basically you are our HR function that will tell you everything that you need to know, which is relevant to the specific location.
So you're the HR function as far as the company goes. Are you also the HR function as far as the employee goes?
Yes, for HR-related matters, we are.
So they'll talk to you if they want to raise something related to HR.
Well, yeah, if it's about pay and pay slips, for instance, yes, that they would address it to us. On the other hand, of course, for instructions, work-related instructions, and also, for instance, approval of vacation days or so, that's of course something that like basically is in the daily work activities, and those will be that will be for the client, logically.
We have a question here from the audience also around how you manage these variations. It's a difficult one, so get ready. But Omar asks, how do you avoid wage exploitation? For example, $1,000 a month might sound like a good salary these days in a place like Lebanon, where I'm from, but it's less than minimum wage in the US. Is that something that you work on educating the companies about?
Yes. Yeah, so first things first, of course, if you hire someone, for instance, in Lebanon, and this individual is employed with our partner or our own entity there, local labor law applies. So US minimum wage guidelines generally do not apply. And so that being said, yeah, we do consult. Of course, it will always be a decision between the client and the talent, what the exact salary and remuneration package is going to be. But we do have a lot of information available. We have salary benchmark tools, even integrated in our platform. So you can type a job title, and you can get some guidance as to what is generally recommended local salary for that role. So that's what we do. And of course, also on the benefit side, we tell you what's statutory in that country, but also what is recommended, because it's basically generally accepted that every employee receives it. So there's that's exactly the HR support that we are offering.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then in terms of the moment, first of all, I had no idea that you could be registered as a company as just an employer without the remainder of your activity. That's news to me, and I wonder if that's available everywhere or if it's specific to certain countries.
Yeah, it is specific to certain countries. So we have a product around it that's focusing especially on Europe. But yeah, it's not available in every country. That is correct.
And what are the tax implications of that? Are you still treated like a company that is fully registered there, or how does then tax operate for you?
Yeah, so then you will be so the client is registered as an employer. As a result, they will be formally required for the employment tax and social security premiums that you need to calculate, withhold, and remit. Basically, we will do it on your behalf as basically the service that we provide, but you'll be responsible. And next step would be if this presence also creates what we call a corporate tax presence, so like a profit taxation presence. That's not necessarily always, and it's generally something that we prefer to not have, because it's like massive administrative burden and it can become quite costly. That's a topic that's a little bit in the gray area. And why is that? Because all of the rules that we're, by the way, talking about, wage tax, social security, labor law, but also corporate tax, they were obviously not written with remote workers, be them permanent or be it temporarily. They were not written for these individuals. They did not exist at that time. So we live in a very special time right now where employers need to somehow manage this. They grab the opportunity from it, but also employees are just saying, you know, I'm employed, but I don't really care where I'm at. And you as an employer, you simply do it for me, please. Thank you. So employers need to somehow work with those rules. Also, of course, what we will see is that national or international legislators are very much working on trying to adjust or just increase explanation around how to go about all of these rules.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you're starting to see like regulators really emerge with some interesting solutions to this problem. And is anything already out in the open yet, or is it still all in the works?
There's a couple of things out in the open, but not too much. Legislators by nature are slow, and I don't think that's a bad thing. They look very carefully at what's happening, and then they go through a process, and that process takes some time. But you, for instance, see, I think two anecdotes are interesting. Spanish authorities are seeming to see the opportunity of remote work for a good reason. Like, many people want to go there because they've got great food and great weather. So that's one. But also, Spain is known for its high youth unemployment because of the system, basically. So it's a really great opportunity for them. And authorities seem to recognize that. So they are pretty lean and agile in how they explain, for instance, this corporate tax liability. On the other hand, that's already a little bit longer. Some time ago, I think it was the New York tax office, who was very, very unhappy with so many New Yorkers moving outside of the city during the pandemic. And they were like, no, we need our income. And they are pretty much fighting against this new reality of people working no longer in the city. So there you see authorities, which is also like human nature, right? Holding on to this status quo and saying, no, we cannot have this new reality. We need what we've always had. I think those are two interesting, different types of handling this.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, we've seen, I mean, where I live in Dubai, in the UAE, I don't know if you've seen that, they very quickly issued what they call the remote work visa, which is gaining the opportunity of people who maybe have been in countries that had lockdowns for a very long time. They were sick and tired of the winter. And so Dubai was like, no problem. You can come and work right here. We have sunshine. We are not on lockdown. You can come and enjoy your life. And I think maybe Barbados also did that. Like, there were a couple of these exotic destinations that very quickly jumped on board to bring in the revenue, in fact, of people migrating there to live, even if their employment contract was somewhere else. And I was wondering, in terms of personal taxation, how that works as well. You know, it depends on the countries, but my understanding is that in most countries, if you don't spend 186 days a year or whatever it is, then you can claim not to be a local tax resident as an employee. Is that something that we're going to see change, where the location of your contract and your taxation are going to be more closely linked?
That would be interesting, right? So yeah, it's 183 days. It's basically a standard rule in every tax treaty. It relates to personal income tax, and it has some other tax effects too, but not everything is covered. I'm a tax lawyer too, right? So I'm okay with being a little bit conservative. I don't think that threshold is going to change anytime soon. The only thing that I think is going to change very rapidly is two things. Of course, there's going to be additional explanation on how to go about people working temporarily from an island like Barbados or something like that. When did, don't want to make it too technical, but when did you give up your local residence, for instance, in the US, and when do you become a citizen of another place? Right. So I think there will be more clarity around that. And I do expect also an increased and more serious, and I'll get to that in a second, local explanation of those rules. And why do I say more serious? Because quite frankly, although I like these island arrangements, in practice, I think they're only interesting for American contractors. I don't think they're really relevant for employees. And I also think they were very much born out of desperation, which is totally understandable. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I just think they were very, like, maybe a little bit superficial, a great starting point. And I expect countries, also those islands, to come up with more serious, more structural and better, like, argued solutions to prepare for this, like, new way of global employment.
Yeah, that's a really fair point. All right, so stepping a little bit out of the taxation and kind of legal side of things, I also, earlier you mentioned, of course, that there's all these ways to make it legally possible and well managed, but that one should not forget all of the human aspect of hiring globally, which is also something that requires intentional intervention. So let's start with the first question, which is, what is the best advice that you give people about onboarding team members globally? Of course, there's the legal aspect, which you guys take care of. But what are your thoughts about things that people should be careful about when they onboard people from other cultures and other time zones and in new contexts?
Well, I think you need to be aware of the change that you are basically establishing. Consider it the change that we all experienced during the pandemic, just going to the office every once in a while, maybe every day, and then all of a sudden you have to be at home. I think hiring your first individual from another country, which is going to work permanently from there, is more or less a similar big transformation where you should not go light about it at all. And I think, like, the key thing that you'd of course need to have is trust in each other. There's no, thank God you cannot micromanagement over borders, so to say. Yeah, and that's, I think, a massive transformation, but a really cool one. I think it's for the better of everybody.
So Anwar here asks you, what platforms or tools do you recommend for better collaboration and connection? Maybe what are your favorites?
Yeah, so I've been working with a corporate for 13 years and I've now only experienced Slack for only a couple of months and I really like it. But, yeah, but what I like better is, and that's also really new to me, and you have to, like, step over this boundary of like self-consciousness or so, is like videotaping yourself through, for instance, Loom, which like is really great if you get used to it, making it async, create a video, post it. I think that is going to, that for me was the biggest adjustment, really awkward at times, but now I'm used to it. I really love it.
Yeah, I received a nice message yesterday on Loom from someone who lives in Europe, actually in Amsterdam, and I loved it. It was the first, like, I've received voice notes before, and I've also seen a lot of, like, Loom videos where it was a demo, right? Like, it was like, you should click here and go there and so on. But now I think they're being recorded more as personal messages, and it was incredible. It was like having an animated, holiday card, almost like Harry Potter. You open the thing and then you see them in front of you, and it was a really pleasant experience. I think that's a really good tip. Let's keep going. Daniela's asking, since we're on the audience questions here, we kind of touched upon that, but I think I can re-ask it, which is, at what point during the growth of a team do you think that hiring globally can have a big advantage? Like, is it more that this is great for large employers, for scale-ups, for startups? Like, at what point of the company's growth do you think that there's the biggest advantage there?
So in general, I think there is no difference, right? If you need someone, then it's simple, right? If you're looking in a space where there's only 10 people, or you're looking in a space where there's 100, probably you're going to find someone better qualified and who's qualified easier in that 100, in a group of 100 people. So I think for every employee, generally, it's the right thing to do. But I've experienced myself now with WorkMotion, where we grew, as I said, from 5 to 250 people in this startup scene and in the scale-up scene. in order to facilitate the growth that you need to realize as a company, you need to be even one more step ahead of that curve, which was like, I cannot do it, right? Thank God we've got our founders. That's not for me. I'm way too slow for that. But we've got people in our company who can do it and who can keep up that pace. And that really means you need to like put full throttle to it. And I think there, where you really have a very high and quick demand, that's of course where global hiring becomes more interesting. You can onboard people much quicker, and you simply do not have the time to really look within, for instance, one single market, Germany or so.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So speaking about, where people are when they're working, on your website, you guys have a global index of the cities best facilitating remote work. And you look into factors like, of course, remote work compliance, but things like cost of living, livability, the infrastructure. Do you think that we're going to see, we've talked a lot about people moving in and out of cities. We saw like a big exodus out of cities during the pandemic, but now if you look at places like New York, we've seen people come back actually. What are your thoughts about the kinds of places that are going to attract the most remote workers?
Yeah, I hope so. I'm living in a city myself too, and I love city life. So I think that will also logically remain, but I do think that we will see societal shifts like that I in my life have not really seen before. I always use it as an example. So I've got a 2-year-old boy and a 0-year-old boy, basically almost turning 1. And I think honestly that they will look at me when they're 20, well, probably 25, and they will really ask me seriously, saying, "So Dad, you used to stay in Amsterdam during winter? You'd work from this place when there was snow and rain and all of that. You wouldn't just go to somewhere else where it's nicer?" I think they will, honestly, I think they will not understand. It will become their new normal that you have like seasonality in where you stay. To a certain extent, right? If you have kids that need to go to school, of course, it's not for everybody. But I think society, companies, employers, employees, but also like shops and restaurants, etc., we will see a massive shift in there. And of course, not in the short term, but we're talking 5, 10, 20 years from now, there's going to be massive change. And I think like there isn't a greater moment basically to be part of HR than now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's like the most exciting time for HR since ever, because they finally have the opportunity to rethink things from the ground up. I'm really happy to be in this space as well, adjacently. So personal question there, Peter. I don't know if you have the answer, but if you were to pick another place to go and work from, do you know where you would go right now?
I lived in Berlin and worked from there for a while. I would right away go back there also, but I'd have to turn the sun on, and that's difficult over there. So yeah, well, honestly, if I would not have had kids, I think we would have spent a lot of time working from the Mediterranean countries like Spain, Italy, Croatia is beautiful. Yeah, with kids, it becomes right away difficult, and that's also totally fine. Yeah, so hopefully I ever get to work in Barcelona. It's a little bit boring maybe, right? But I just love the combination of city life, metropolistic feel, and still great climate.
Yeah, I agree. And amazing food too. I was actually, we saw a lot of Europeans actually come to Dubai and buy property during the pandemic, particularly from places like Switzerland or Germany. And I was actually telling my husband that a great value proposition would be a school that would do 6 months here and 6 months there. Because then school would no longer be the anchoring factor. It would just pick up everybody and move them to Dubai and then send them back. Of course, only affordable to the lucky few, but those are the ones that did come to this country. So I thought it would be a good value proposition for them. Just a note here.
You're right, and that's the end game, right? Like I think many people will be like, "Yeah, great idea, Marilyn," but it's like long shot. It's a long shot, but it doesn't mean that we're not growing towards that point. I'm pretty confident that schools like that will pop up.
Yeah, or even like schools that already are global, that would then allow students to easily move from one to the other simply by aligning schedules. I mean, it doesn't take much more than that, and then you could just do your class on a Friday afternoon and then go on Monday and just keep going where you picked up, you know. Why not? We're seeing here Mike, first of all, telling us he's watching from his sunny garden. And then second of all, asking if, you know, we think that people might perhaps not even own a home anymore. Is this going to push us more and more towards the sharing economy? Just need a rent allowance and just move around from one place to another. What are your thoughts there?
Well, great. It's a great opportunity. That's another societal shift. Of course, you always see investment and things like that, but it is true. What is the key barrier for like moving to another place for a longer time, other than kids maybe? That is indeed everything that you have in a certain location. So yeah, and the whole thing is, right, we're talking now about societal employee-driven change. Don't forget the employer, the backend just needs to somehow all arrange this, right? It's not even a question anymore. Employers need to solve this. Otherwise, I'm gone. You can actually see it from like the Great Resignation, although there's like different opinions on it. But we should definitely not forget the challenge that employers are going to face in basically trying to figure all of this out in the back end, but they do not have a choice. That's clear to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I have these conversations often because a lot of the work that we do is around how we help organizations to create the right environment for flexibility, for agility, for people to work from everywhere, including the office. I am definitely not, you know, someone who's evangelizing the death of the office. I still think that it has a role to play. But I often say to them, I'm like, this isn't about like doing a buffet for employees, right? God knows I've always been defending, you know, the idea that we should create happy workplaces. But happy workplaces don't just mean like we give employees everything they ask us for, but it's also how is it going to enable or hurt our business if we do or don't move in one direction, right? And I think at this point, there is no debate that access to talent, which is for most companies outside of maybe the ones that could automate, but that's really such a small fragment. Access to great talent continues to be the driver of the sustainability of organizations on the long run. And if you can't hire people because your employee value proposition is just not matching with what they require, then from a business point of view, in terms of your revenues, your profitability, your ability to grow, your ability to stay competitive, then you're losing out, right? So this isn't just like, oh, let's yield into, you know, what we're being pressured to do. I think companies need to first recognize they won't be able to hire great talent and then ask themselves the question from the other end of the spectrum, which is, well, how is this an opportunity as opposed to how is this a burden that we now have to deal with? I think a shift in that perspective could be something that companies win by trying to do. Rhea here chimes in with the school system thing. Actually, that's one of the great benefits of French lycées, I think. So my family moved a lot and they put us in a school system under the same organization that had the same curriculum and schedule. So whenever we moved, all they had to do is notify the school in the new place. Education change is probably the next step to accompany the nomadic work life. So the French lycée system is a little bit like that. IB is a little bit like that. But still, you have to follow the cycle of the year. Maybe schools can now become more agile and shorten their cycles a little bit.
Let's see, huh?
I mean, I'm sure somebody's going to come up with that. I want to ask you about your personal experience, right? Like you joined WorkMotion this year during a period of scale up, as you mentioned, significant growth. What has been your experiences as an employee of a company like that, and what kind of advice do you have to give to people who are joining as remote employees in global organizations?
Yeah, so I've been working remotely myself already for basically since our oldest was born. Basically, after living in Berlin, we moved back to the Netherlands, but I always kept working for the German firm. So even the good old corporate PwC was enabling me to work remotely. There's, of course, a very different growth rate at PwC, where it's very slowly but surely and just standard. Compared to the situation at WorkMotion, where, as I said, we grew from, like when I started talking, 5 to 250. Yeah, and I have to be honest, as I said, right? That's you need the particular type of people to drive that growth. I'm not that type of person, to be honest. I've never experienced it before, because what you really need is to be like so far ahead of the game, and that's my personal experience, which is the coolest experience that I could have basically asked for, is to be a part of something like that and just see how different that is, and it just makes you feel like it puts you with 2 feet on the ground, right? Working in corporates for such a long time, being a lawyer, everybody listens to you, etc. And then you join a rocket ship like that. It's a very humbling experience and really cool, broader experience too. Yeah, the remote work experience. I guess it's still not for all. I do pretty well, but also in a mix up. I think, by the way, everybody has that. Like, you have good times, you've got bad times. But I always refer back to my two boys. They will ask me about Spain and Amsterdam in winter, but I will never be able to tell them that back in the day, Daddy would go to the office on a Monday morning and like every day from 9 to 6, and you would do that until, well, by the time they're grown up, they need to do it until they're 70 or so.
Right.
Like, it's not something that you can go back towards. So whether it's fully remote or hybrid, you need to find your own like situation and what's comfortable for you.
And what has been either your experience either on the receiving or on the giving end of how you can support people who are joining this rocket ship to adapt to the speed and the ways of working? Like, is there something specific that you do when a new joiner comes in? Is there something that when you joined someone did for you that has really supported you in getting on board with the speed and the velocity of this company?
Well, maybe that's what I think is more important is when you are working remotely, you need to find your own like pace and your own situation. And I tend to overcompensate. So what do? I sport during the day when it's nice weather. I put my bike on the rooftop terrace here. I just go for a run in the park, and I even block it in my calendar so that people see that I'm doing sports during the day. And yeah, well, you can give me a call then. I'm just not picking up. On the contrary, I'll usually be working in the evenings. It's dark, kids are in bed. What else should I do, right? So I overcompensate in setting up my own flexible schedule to make sure that other people and team members also feel comfortable with that. And I think that is really important, because you see a lot of people struggling with remote work. I think because they also either they lack the feeling of trust, or they cannot manage it themselves to do it and say, I'm off now for an hour and I'm just going to do something else. And in order to like empower people to do the same, I overcompensate.
I love that. That's really great. I think role modeling is really, really important. And with that, we've come to our rapid fire questions. Are you ready for them, Pieter?
I am ready.
All right. So complete my sentences with 1 or 2 or 3 words, but you can choose. I'm not going to be strict about the 1-word rule, but the one thing every team needs is
trust.
Yeah, that's a really good one, especially in a remote setting. I mean, any team needs trust, and even more explicitly in a remote setting. The one thing a team needs to avoid at all costs?
Micromanagement.
Absolutely. A good team leader is?
Inspiring.
What is the best book on Teams?
It's not on Teams, but it's the one that I can definitely recommend. It's Remote is the Way from Ivo Zapar, like remote house founder. If you don't know it, Google him or Google that. He's a very young, talented Polish guy, and really a remote work thought leader, not from the compliance part, but from how you live it. It's a really cool book. So Remote is the Way.
Brilliant. I'm not familiar. I will look into it after this call. And then what is your favorite team ritual?
That's a fun thing, right? If you're remote, so what do you do whenever you have a team ritual? Basically doing drinks together. If we make it together, I prefer socializing. All the rest you do when you're remote.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We all, the importance of human connection cannot be overstated. Whether you can come together in person or you can't, I think over and over again in our team and in a lot of these sessions, team time, which is when we connect together without work being at the center of the conversation, always comes back. I think statistically, probably more than half of our guests have answered something around that this season. And so let's not...
Which is, it's interesting, right? Because it's someone everybody wants, but also if you do it for, it's probably the most difficult to think virtually, right? It's awkward by nature somehow. So I'm really interested to see how that's going to evolve over the next decade too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do it virtually because our team is not co-located in any way. We do a lot of things. We play games online. We do Pictionary. We've invented our own card game called Cosmic Conversations that are conversation starters. It takes a bit of facilitation for sure. It's not like natural where you just like are hanging out and have, you know, a casual conversation. You do have to plan it a bit. And in the beginning, it can feel a bit forced. But if you let yourself into it, then usually everybody has a great time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Pieter, thanks again for taking the time today. I learned quite a bit, and I'm sure everybody in the audience did too. I'm really grateful for your time and everything you've taught us.
Thank you for having me.
And as always, thank you to our attendees and your great questions and comments and chiming in with your own experiences of how, you know, education might evolve or how our relationship to houses might evolve or everything else that everybody contributed. We're very grateful for your time. If you like this video, you think somebody you know might you know, learn something, please do share the link with the people around you. This live will be available forever on LinkedIn, and later on we'll be reposting it on our YouTube and our website, so it'll be available for you guys to rewatch whenever you want. And as always, our team at Cosmic Centaurs is always creating articles, you know, content, worksheets, documenting rituals on our website, cosmiccentaurs.com. So it'll make us really happy if you go there and you sign up for our newsletter to make sure you don't miss any of our news. And then next week, we will be airing a rerun of a webinar that I gave yesterday on how to build cultures that promote innovation. So do join us next Thursday at 3:30 p.m. for that. In the meantime, I wish you all a great end to the week, and I'll be signing us off. See you.